It was a cold autumn evening in Maplewood, a small, peaceful town where everyone knew each other's names and locked their doors only out of habit, not fear. The Thompson house, with its white picket fence and blooming rose bushes, was the kind of home people admired, the kind of place that seemed to glow under the golden streetlights. Inside, Emily Thompson was preparing dinner, humming softly to the tune of an old love song playing from the radio. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air. Her husband, Daniel, a respected architect, was expected home any minute. To the neighbors, they were the perfect couple. Successful, kind, and deeply in love. But behind the warm lights and loving smiles, something dark was brewing. A secret so horrifying that, if revealed, would destroy the image Daniel had spent years building. Emily, in her mid-30s, had soft brown hair that curled at the edges and a smile that could light up a room. She worked as a freelance writer and loved telling stories about ordinary people living extraordinary lives. She believed in love, honesty, and second chances. Everything Daniel had once promised her when they first met in college. To her, marriage was sacred, unbreakable. But lately, she had begun noticing small cracks in their picture-perfect life. Strange phone calls late at night, Daniel's sudden business trips, and the way his eyes sometimes seemed to drift away even when she was speaking. She told herself he was just tired, that work was stressing him out. But deep down, a quiet unease had started to grow, whispering that something wasn't right. That night, the clock struck 7. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires echoing through the quiet street. Emily smiled and straightened her apron, glancing at the family photo hanging on the kitchen wall, the one taken last summer during their trip to the lake. Daniel had his arm around her, both of them laughing, the sunlight reflecting off the water behind them. Looking at it now, she felt a pang of nostalgia. She wanted that happiness back. The easy laughter, the feeling of safety. She didn't know it would be her last night wishing for it. Daniel stepped inside, his shoes muddy, his suit jacket draped carelessly over his arm. "You're late," Emily said playfully, though her voice trembled slightly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Got caught up at work," he murmured, kissing her on the forehead. His hands were cold. Colder than usual. Emily tried to ignore it, forcing a smile as she served dinner. The candlelight flickered between them, casting shadows on the walls. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal again. They talked about trivial things, the new neighbors, the weather, the grocery list. But beneath the surface, tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. After dinner, Emily began clearing the table when Daniel's phone buzzed. He reached for it quickly, too quickly, and turned the screen away from her. She froze. "Who's that?" she asked softly, trying to sound casual. "Just a client," he replied, not looking up. But the name flashing on the screen, before it disappeared, wasn't one she recognized. It wasn't a client. It was a woman's name. Her heart sank. She wanted to believe him, to trust that the man she loved wouldn't lie to her. But that whisper in her chest grew louder. He's hiding something. Later that night, as rain began to tap against the windows, Emily sat alone in bed. Daniel had gone to his office downstairs, saying he needed to finish a proposal. But she could hear him pacing, back and forth, his footsteps heavy, restless. She opened her laptop, her fingers trembling as she searched through their shared documents, looking for anything that would explain the distance between them. What she found instead froze her blood. Hidden among his files was a folder labeled, Confidential. Inside were scanned documents, legal papers, and photos, things that made no sense at first. But as she scrolled through them, her pulse quickened. Offshore accounts. Forged signatures. Transactions in names she didn't recognize. Money, lots of it. Daniel wasn't just an architect. He was involved in something illegal. Something dangerous. Emily's heart pounded as realization dawned. This was his secret. This was why he'd been distant, paranoid, cold. She closed the laptop, her breath shallow. Daniel sat alone in his study, the soft glow of his desk lamp throwing long, trembling shadows across the papers spread before him. His mind raced, heart pounding so violently it almost drowned out the sound of the rain outside. The discovery Emily had just made, though she didn't know the full extent of it yet, was a threat he couldn't ignore. 4 years, Daniel had lived a double life, one built on carefully crafted lies. To the world, He was a respected architect designing homes and offices for Maplewood's wealthiest residents. But behind that facade, he was laundering money for a powerful real estate syndicate. Criminals who used his projects to move dirty cash. It had started small, an easy favor, a quick profit. Then the stakes grew higher. And when he tried to stop, they reminded him that once you were in, you never got out. He had promised himself he could keep Emily safe from it all, that she'd never need to know. But now, with her curiosity leading her to the truth, everything was spiraling out of control. He looked down at his trembling hands, stained with guilt, and whispered to himself, "You did this. You brought her into this." He thought of the men he worked for, men who didn't tolerate mistakes. If they found out his wife had seen those files, they wouldn't just come for him, they'd come for her too. His jaw tightened. He had two choices: confess everything and lose everything, or silence her forever. Upstairs, Emily sat in the dark, tears rolling down her cheeks. She didn't understand what she had just seen, but she knew it was serious. Criminal, even. She remembered the first time she met Daniel. How charming and full of dreams he had been. He'd told her he wanted to build beautiful things, homes where families could feel safe. And she had believed him. She had believed in him. But tonight, she was realizing she had been living with a stranger. A man who smiled easily but whose eyes now hid something cold, something dangerous. She couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made her flinch. She needed to talk to him, to get the truth out of him before the fear consumed her. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, golden and deceptive. Daniel came into the kitchen dressed neatly, calm as ever, pouring himself coffee as if nothing had happened. Emily watched him from across the table, her heart aching with confusion and dread. "Dan," she began carefully, "I went through your laptop last night." He froze, cup halfway to his lips. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice too measured, too calm. "Because I needed to know what's going on," she said, trying not to tremble. "Those files, the fake names, the bank accounts, what are you involved in?" For a moment, silence hung between them like a loaded gun. Then Daniel laughed softly, shaking his head. "You shouldn't believe everything you see. It's work stuff, client records, that's all." But Emily didn't look convinced. "Don't lie to me," she whispered. "Please just tell me the truth." Her eyes glistened with tears. Daniel's mask slipped, just for a second, and she saw it, the flash of anger, the panic, the cold calculation. "You shouldn't have looked," he said quietly, his tone hardening. "You don't understand what you've done." Emily stood up, her voice rising with desperation.
"I'm your wife, Daniel!"
"I'm your wife, Daniel. You're supposed to trust me. If something's wrong, we can fix it together." She reached out to touch his hand, but he pulled away. The warmth between them was gone, replaced by a chilling silence. "It's not that simple," he said. "You've put us both in danger now." His words made her stomach twist. "Danger?" she repeated. "From who?" But he didn't answer. He just stared at the table, eyes distant, jaw tight. Hours later, when Daniel left for work, Emily sat alone again, staring at the front door. Every instinct in her screamed that something was terribly wrong. She picked up her phone, debating whether to call the police. But what would she even say? That her husband had secret bank accounts? That she felt unsafe but had no proof he'd hurt her? No one would believe her. And yet, deep down, she knew this was no ordinary lie. It was something deadly. Daniel drove to his office in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The rain had stopped, but inside his chest, the storm was only beginning. He made one stop before heading downtown, a secluded payphone near the old highway. He dialed a number from memory. A rough voice answered. "You told her, didn't you?" the man growled. Daniel's breath caught. "No," he said quickly. "She found something by accident. I can fix it." There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end said coldly, "If she talks, you're done. Handle it or we'll handle you." The line went dead. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the receiver. His reflection in the cracked glass of the booth looked like a stranger's face. Pale, sweating, haunted. He knew what "handle it" meant. He didn't want to believe he could ever hurt Emily, but the more he thought about it, the more he convinced himself it was the only way. If she exposed him, their lives were over. And so, as he drove home that evening, his decision hardened like ice in his veins. He would do whatever it took to keep his secret, even if it meant silencing the one person who loved him most. The evening sky was painted in shades of crimson and gold, but to Emily, it looked more like a warning, a sky bleeding before the night swallowed everything. She stood by the window, watching Daniel's car pull into the driveway. Her stomach knotted with unease. All day, she had been trying to convince herself that she was overreacting, that her husband's secret wasn't as dark as it seemed. But every time she remembered his eyes, that flash of anger, that cold emptiness, the fear returned stronger than before. Something inside her whispered that tonight would change everything. Daniel entered the house quietly, hanging his coat on the rack, his face expressionless. He greeted her with a soft, "Hey," his tone almost too normal. But Emily could see through it. His calmness felt rehearsed, practiced. She noticed small details now, how his hands trembled when he poured himself a drink, how his gaze lingered on her just a second too long, like he was studying her. "You didn't eat?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly. "Not hungry. Just tired." She nodded, though her heart raced. Every movement of his felt deliberate, calculated, as if he was playing a role and waiting for the right moment to reveal the final act. That night, she tried to act normal. They watched a movie together, or at least pretended to. Emily couldn't focus. Her mind was spiraling. Every few minutes, she'd glance at Daniel, wondering what he was thinking, what he was hiding behind that composed mask. She thought about calling her sister, about leaving the house, but she didn't want to believe her life had turned into something out of a nightmare. She was afraid, not just of Daniel but of being wrong about him. Because if she was wrong, she'd be destroying the man she once loved. When Daniel excused himself to get some air, she waited until she heard the back door click shut. Her hands trembled as she opened his briefcase, heart pounding against her ribs. Inside were more documents, papers stamped with foreign logos, false identification cards, and photos of men she didn't recognize. But one item froze her completely. A small, black handgun wrapped in a towel. Her breath caught in her throat. Daniel didn't own a gun. At least, not one she knew about. She dropped the towel and stepped back, her pulse racing. The weight of the truth was suffocating. Whatever Daniel was involved in, it wasn't just financial crime. It was dangerous, violent. She had to leave. She needed to get out before it was too late. But before she could act, she heard footsteps behind her. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice low, steady. Emily froze, words caught in her throat. I was just what?" he interrupted, taking a step closer. His calmness terrified her more than if he had shouted. "You shouldn't go through my things, Emily." She could feel his eyes boring into her, cold and unblinking. "You scared me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Then maybe you should stop looking for things that aren't yours to find." His tone was sharp, final. He walked past her, closed the briefcase, and locked it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Emily wanted to scream, to run, to call someone. Anyone, but she felt frozen. Her heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from the door. Panic rose like a wave. She tried the windows, sealed shut. The phone line, dead. He had planned this. Every step, every detail. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. She looked up at the ceiling, her eyes wide with terror. Daniel was awake. In that moment, Emily realized she was no longer living in her home. She was trapped in a cage, and the man she once loved was the one holding the key. The silence in the house was suffocating. Emily stood frozen in the dark hallway, listening to every faint sound. The creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind through the chimney. But beneath it all, she could hear something else. Daniel's slow, deliberate footsteps upstairs. She clutched her phone tightly, praying for a signal, a lifeline. But the screen remained blank. No service. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She knew she couldn't wait until morning. She had to find another way out. Moving quietly, she slipped into the kitchen. The moonlight poured through the window, turning everything silver and ghostly. She checked the back door again. Locked tight, with an extra latch she hadn't noticed before. Daniel had done this on purpose. Her eyes darted to the window above the sink. If she could just open it, Maybe she could climb out and run to the neighbors. But when she tried, the frame wouldn't budge. Screws had been drilled into the sides, sealing it shut. Her breath came out in sharp, panicked bursts. It felt like the house itself was turning against her. A floorboard creaked above her. She froze. The footsteps were moving, coming closer to the stairs. Her hands trembled as she looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. The pantry door stood slightly open. She slipped inside, pressing herself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Through the thin crack between the door and the frame, she saw Daniel descend the staircase, barefoot, wearing a white undershirt, his expression calm, too calm. He held something small in his right hand, a metallic glint catching the dim light. The gun. Emily. His voice was soft, almost tender. Why are you hiding? Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would give her away. She pressed a hand over her mouth, praying he couldn't hear her breathing. I know you're scared, he continued, his tone patient, almost soothing. But you don't need to be. You just don't understand what I'm doing. I'm trying to protect us. Protect you. She squeezed her eyes shut. His footsteps moved closer. Slow, steady. The kitchen floor creaked beneath his weight. You looked through things that weren't meant for you, he said softly, his voice right outside the pantry door now. And now you've put us both in a difficult position. A tear slipped down her cheek. Please don't open it. Please don't open it. After a few moments, there was silence. Then she heard him step back. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor. He was sitting down, waiting, watching. You can't stay in there forever, Em, he said, the tenderness gone now, replaced by something cold. Come out, and we'll talk. We'll fix this. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. She could see his shadow stretching across the floor under the door, still patient, like a predator waiting for its prey to move. She knew that if she stayed there, he'd find her. She had to think fast. Then her eyes caught something, the small emergency exit window near the floor of the pantry, used for ventilation. It was narrow, but maybe just wide enough. She crouched down, her hands trembling as she tried to slide the latch open without making a sound. It moved slightly, stuck. Then with one final push, it came loose. A faint whisper of cold night air brushed against her face. Freedom. But as she began to crawl through, her foot hit ajar on the shelf, sending it crashing to the floor. The sound was deafening. The chair outside scraped violently against the tile. Emily! Daniel's voice roared. The calm was gone, replaced by raw fury. She scrambled through the window, scraping her arms against the metal frame, landing hard on the wet grass outside. Pain shot through her knee, but she didn't stop. She ran barefoot through the backyard, the grass slick from rain, her breath ragged. Behind her, the back door slammed open. Emily! Come back here. She darted toward the neighbor's fence, but the wood was too high, too slick to climb easily. She tried anyway, gripping the boards, her nails breaking as she pulled herself up. A gunshot split the night. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood. She screamed, slipping and falling back onto the ground. The bullet had missed. Barely. She rolled onto her stomach and crawled toward the trees behind their house. Daniel's voice followed her. Closer now. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he shouted, his footsteps pounding against the wet ground. Emily stumbled into the woods, branches clawing at her skin, her breath coming in sharp sobs. Every shadow looked like him, every sound made her flinch. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop. She had to survive. The rain began again, heavy and cold, masking the sound of her movement. Somewhere behind her, Daniel cursed loudly, his voice echoing through the trees. You can't run from this. But Emily didn't look back. She ran until her legs burned, until her lungs felt like fire. She didn't know how far she'd gone, only that she was free for now. And as the storm raged above her, she realized the horrifying truth. The man chasing her through the darkness wasn't her husband anymore. He was something else, something she no longer recognized. The rain poured harder now, turning the forest floor into a slippery mess of mud and roots. Emily's clothes clung to her skin, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Every muscle in her body ached, but she didn't dare slow down. The only sound louder than the storm was her heartbeat. Fast, wild, and terrified. She glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see Daniel's silhouette emerging through the trees, but all she saw was darkness and rain. For a brief moment, she thought she'd lost him. Then, far behind her, a branch snapped. Her pulse spiked again. He's still coming. Through the thick mist, Emily saw faint lights in the distance. A road, maybe a farmhouse. She stumbled toward it, tripping over roots and rocks, the cold slicing through her bones. When she reached the edge of the forest, her shoes were gone, her hands scraped raw, but she didn't care. A small wooden house sat by the roadside, its porch light flickering. She ran to it and pounded on the door. "Help! Please, someone, help me!" she shouted, her voice trembling. The door opened after a long moment. An older man with a kind but wary face appeared, holding a flashlight. "Ma'am? Are you all right?" Emily could barely speak. "Please, he's after me. My husband. He's trying to kill me." The man's eyes widened. He ushered her inside quickly, locking the door behind her. "Sit down, I'll call the police." Emily sank onto the couch, shaking uncontrollably. The man handed her a blanket and disappeared into the kitchen to make the call. She could hear him speaking, his tone urgent but calm. "Yes, she's here now. She says her husband's after her." "No, I don't think she's armed." Emily wanted to believe she was safe, that help was finally coming. But deep down, something told her it wasn't over. 20 minutes later, flashing red and blue lights cut through the rain outside. 2 officers entered, their uniforms dripping wet. "Mrs. Thompson?" one of them asked gently. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Please, you have to believe me," she said, her voice breaking. "He's dangerous, he has a gun, he locked me in the house." The officer raised a hand to calm her. "We understand. You're safe now." But before she could say more, a familiar sound broke the silence. The low growl of an engine approaching. Emily's eyes widened. She turned toward the window. Headlights. A car pulling up fast, splashing through puddles. Daniel's car. "That's him," she cried. "That's my husband." The officers exchanged glances, then one stepped outside, hand on his holster. Daniel stepped out of the car, his face a perfect mask of confusion and worry. "Officer," he called, voice shaking just enough to sound sincere. "Thank God you found her. My wife's been having a breakdown. She ran off and I've been searching all night." Emily stood frozen. The calm, charming tone, the practiced expression, it was all back. The officer turned to Emily. "Mrs. Thompson, is this your husband?" She shook her head furiously. "He's lying." "Please, you don't understand." Daniel's voice cut in smoothly. "She's been struggling for months," he said sadly. "She thinks people are after her. I didn't want to involve the police, but she's not well." The doubt in the officer's eyes made Emily's stomach drop. "No," she cried. "He's lying. He has documents, guns, he's done terrible things," her voice cracked. The officer frowned slightly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down," he said gently, stepping closer. "We'll sort this out." Daniel seized the moment. "Let me talk to her, please," he said quietly. "I just want to help her." His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a loving husband trying to save his fragile wife. Emily shook her head violently. "Don't let him near me." But the officers hesitated. To them, Daniel looked composed, reasonable. Emily looked terrified, drenched, and incoherent. The older officer turned to Daniel. "Sir, we'll take her to the station for a statement. You can follow us there." Daniel nodded solemnly. "Of course. Whatever helps." But as the officers led Emily to the car, she caught his eyes for a brief second. The look he gave her wasn't confusion or concern. It was a warning. "You can't escape me." At the station, Emily tried to tell her story again. She explained about the hidden files, the secret accounts, the gun. But when the officers searched Daniel's home the next morning, everything was gone. The laptop, the papers, even the gun. All missing. The house was spotless. To the police, it looked like a misunderstanding. Maybe even paranoia. Daniel had filed a report, claiming Emily was unstable and had been under mental stress since her father's passing last year. It was a perfect trap, and she had walked right into it. By the end of the day, the police released her into Daniel's custody, advising them to seek counseling. Emily's heart sank as she was led back to the man she now knew was capable of anything. He smiled at the officers, thanked them for their help, then turned to her with that cold, empty stare. In the car ride home, neither of them spoke. The rain had stopped, but the silence was worse than any storm. Emily stared out the window, her mind spinning. She realized there would be no one to save her. If she wanted to survive, she'd have to save herself. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the kitchen window, painting the room in dull shades of gray. The house felt colder than before, not because of the weather, but because of the silence. Emily sat at the table, staring at her untouched coffee. Across from her, Daniel read the newspaper, the picture of composure. Every few seconds, he'd glance up at her and smile, as if nothing had happened. The night before might as well have been a dream, a terrible illusion only she remembered. "Sleep well?" he asked casually, folding the paper. His tone was light, conversational, but every word carried weight. Emily nodded without speaking. She could feel the trap closing again, invisible but suffocating. He had convinced the police, erased the evidence, and rebuilt the perfect image of a caring husband with frightening precision. To the outside world, Daniel Thompson was respectable and successful, a man who loved his wife deeply. But to Emily, he was a stranger sitting across the table, holding her prisoner behind smiles and polite conversation. "I think we should get away for a bit," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Maybe the cabin by the lake? It'll help clear your head." Her stomach tightened. The cabin, their remote property 2 hours from town, had no neighbors, no phone signal, no way to call for help. He was planning something. She forced a small smile. "That sounds nice," she whispered. Inside, her mind was screaming. As Daniel left for work, Emily's hands shook. The front door clicked shut, and she let out the breath she'd been holding. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the door, listening to the distant hum of his car fading away. Then she ran to the study. The briefcase was gone, but she checked the desk drawers, the safe, even behind the bookshelves. Nothing. He had cleaned everything. But Emily wasn't ready to give up. She remembered something, the flash drive she had once given him for work. Maybe he'd kept backups. She went to his office upstairs, moving quickly but carefully. On the top shelf of the bookcase sat a small metal tin, one she recognized instantly. Inside, among paperclips and old receipts, lay a flash drive. Her heart raced as she plugged it into her laptop. For a few seconds, the screen was blank. Then a folder appeared, labeled simply D2. She opened it, and there it was: documents, transaction records, names, bank codes. The truth. Proof of everything he'd done. Tears filled her eyes. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope. But it was fragile. One wrong move and it would vanish. She needed to get the information out safely. She transferred everything onto her own USB, then hid it inside a hollowed-out candle jar on her desk. If Daniel discovered it, she'd be finished. When Daniel returned that evening, his demeanor was calm, even cheerful. He kissed her forehead, asked about dinner, and talked about their supposed weekend getaway. Emily matched his tone, pretending to agree, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. Every word she spoke felt like walking a tightrope over fire. One slip, and she knew he'd sensed the lie. After dinner, Daniel poured them both a glass of wine. "To new beginnings," he said, lifting his glass. Emily smiled faintly and clinked it against his. "To new beginnings." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. He watched her closely as she drank, his eyes dark and unreadable. That night, when he finally fell asleep, Emily lay awake beside him, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't run again. Not until she had help. The police wouldn't believe her without proof, but if she could get the USB to someone trustworthy, maybe she could finally expose him. She thought of the only person who might listen, Detective Laura Greene, the young officer who had taken her statement that night. Laura had looked at her with sympathy, not suspicion. Maybe she would believe her. Quietly, Emily got out of bed, retrieved the hidden USB, and slipped it into her pocket. She moved like a shadow through the house, every creak of the floor sounding like thunder. Just as she reached the front door, a sound froze her, the faint rustle of sheets behind her. Daniel stirred. He murmured sleepily. Her heart stopped. She turned slowly, forcing her voice to sound calm. Just getting water, she whispered. He nodded, half asleep, and rolled over. She exhaled shakily. Moments later, she stepped out into the cool night, her pulse hammering in her throat. The sky was clear, the moon bright. For the first time in days, she felt something like strength return to her. She was no longer just running. She was fighting back. As she walked down the empty street, clutching the USB in her pocket, Emily whispered to herself, "He built this cage, but I'll burn it down." She didn't know yet that Daniel was already awake, standing at the window, watching her go, a faint knowing smile on his lips. Emily reached the police station just after sunrise. The early morning light fell in sharp beams through the glass doors, and her reflection looked pale and fragile in the polished floor. She clutched the USB drive tightly in her hand as though it were a lifeline. Every step toward the reception desk felt heavier, like walking through water. "I need to speak to Detective Laura Greene," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound calm. The officer at the front desk looked at her, then nodded. "She's in her office. I'll let her know you're here." Minutes later, Laura appeared, young, sharp-eyed, dressed neatly in a gray suit. She recognized Emily immediately and her expression softened. "Mrs. Thompson, I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon." Emily swallowed hard. "I have something you need to see," she said, holding up the small flash drive. Laura motioned her into the office, closing the door behind them. As Emily plugged the drive into Laura's computer, the files loaded on the screen, a labyrinth of transactions, hidden accounts, and coded documents. Laura leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "Where did you get this?" "It's my husband's," Emily whispered. "He's been hiding things. Illegal things. I think that's why She couldn't finish. Her voice broke and tears welled in her eyes. Laura placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing bringing this in," she said quietly. "We'll need to verify everything, but if this is what it looks like, it's big. Very big." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt like the air in her lungs was clean. Someone finally believed her. Laura promised to keep the evidence safe and told her to stay somewhere secure until they could build a case. "You're not safe at home," she warned. "If your husband knows you found this, he'll come for you." But Emily shook her head. "He already suspects," she whispered. "I can feel it." Later that afternoon, Laura contacted her team to begin tracing the accounts, but something strange happened. When they tried to access the files again, the documents were gone. The folder labeled D2 had vanished from the flash drive, leaving only blank space. Laura frowned. "That's impossible," she muttered. Emily's heart dropped. "He knew," she said. "He must have known." Back at the house, Daniel sat in his office, staring at his laptop screen. He watched the small tracking window in the corner of his encrypted software. A signal blinked red. The USB had been accessed from a government network. A cold, satisfied smile spread across his face. "So," he murmured, "you finally decided to play detective, Em." He leaned back in his chair, his calm demeanor masking the quiet fury underneath. He had built his secrets carefully, too carefully to be undone by one frightened woman. But still, she had crossed a line. That evening, Emily went to stay in a hotel under her maiden name, as Laura suggested. The walls were thin, the air smelled faintly of bleach, but for once, she wasn't in the same house as Daniel. She sat on the bed, clutching her phone, replaying every moment of the past few days in her mind. The fear hadn't gone away, but something else had taken root: determination. She wasn't just running anymore. She was gathering strength. A knock at the door startled her. Her pulse jumped. "Who is it?" she called out. "Room service," came a voice. She frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. When she opened the door, no one was there. Just a small envelope on the floor. She picked it up, her hands trembling. Inside was a single piece of paper. 4 words, written in Daniel's handwriting. "You can't hide, Emily." Her legs gave way, and she sank to the floor, the note fluttering from her hand. He had found her already. The walls of safety she had built were crumbling again. Panicked, she called Laura immediately. "He knows where I am," she whispered. Laura's voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Stay inside. Lock the door. I'm sending someone right now." But Emily couldn't stay still. Her mind raced. How had he found her so quickly? The answer struck her with sickening clarity. Her phone. He must have planted something on it. A tracker, a spyware app. She turned it off instantly, yanked the battery out, and stuffed it into the drawer. For a few minutes, the room was completely silent except for her shaky breathing. Outside, a car engine idled softly in the parking lot. The headlights flashed once, then went dark. Daniel was closer than she thought. Detective Laura Greene didn't sleep that night. The flickering light from her office lamp cast long shadows across stacks of reports and photographs. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something. Something right in front of her. The files Emily had brought were gone, but Laura had seen enough to know they were real. Offshore accounts, coded payments, untraceable transfers, all leading back to one man. Daniel Thompson wasn't just a charming husband with a spotless record. He was hiding a network of secrets that stretched far beyond their quiet town. She dug deeper into his background. His university records, his business registrations, even his tax history. All were flawless. Too flawless. Every file looked as though it had been rewritten by a perfectionist. Then Laura found something strange. A company name that appeared once in an old contract, then vanished from every record. Orion Logistics, dissolved 5 years ago. The signature on the dissolution papers? Daniel's. Her pulse quickened. Orion had been tied to shell companies overseas, suspected of trafficking sensitive data and government contracts for foreign clients. If Daniel was involved, it meant he had built his wealth by selling secrets, and anyone who discovered that truth would be a threat, including his own wife. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her dim hotel room, staring at the note Daniel had sent. Her hands shook as she turned it over and over. There was no return address, no fingerprints. He had thought of everything. The words echoed in her mind. "You can't hide, Emily." It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. She looked around the room, the television, the mirror, the smoke detector, and suddenly wondered if any of them were safe. Could he see her? Hear her? The paranoia clawed at her until she finally pulled the curtains shut and sat on the floor, hugging her knees. Her phone buzzed suddenly. The number was unknown. She hesitated before answering. "Emily?" came Laura's voice. Relief flooded through her. "Thank God," Emily whispered. "He's out there, Laura. He found me." "I know," Laura said. "Listen carefully. I've got people working on tracing his movements, but you need to stay calm. We found something big. Something about your husband's past. He's not who he says he is." Emily's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Laura took a deep breath. "Daniel Thompson doesn't exist. The identity was created 13 years ago, right before he married you. The real Daniel Thompson died in a car crash in 2012. Your husband stole his name, his records, everything." The world tilted around her. "That's impossible," Emily whispered. But deep down it made sense. All those years, the secret phone calls, the late nights, the cash payments, the stories that never quite added up. He had built an entire life out of lies. Laura continued, "We think your husband's real name might be David Hale, a systems engineer who disappeared after being investigated for data theft and fraud. The crimes were never proven, but the evidence was damning. He vanished, and a few months later, Daniel Thompson appeared in another city." Emily pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Everything she knew, her marriage, her home, her life, had been constructed by a man who didn't exist. "So all this time," she whispered, "I was married to a ghost." "Not a ghost," Laura said quietly. "A man with everything to lose." Suddenly, a loud thud came from the hallway outside Emily's hotel room. She froze, every muscle tensed. Another sound followed. Slow, deliberate footsteps. She clutched the phone tighter. "Laura," she whispered. "Someone's here." "Lock the door," Laura ordered. "Don't make a sound. I'm sending officers now." Emily moved silently, sliding the chain across the door, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. She pressed her ear to the wood. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the faint scrape of metal against the door handle. Her mind raced. Was it him? Or was she imagining it? She took a slow breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. The sound stopped abruptly, followed by retreating steps. Then nothing. Minutes later, Laura's voice returned. "They're on their way, Emily. Just hang on. We'll protect you." But even as she spoke, Daniel sat in his car 2 blocks away, watching the flashing lights of the police cruisers as they approached the hotel. His expression was calm, unreadable. He knew exactly what he was doing. Every move Emily made, every call she placed, he was one step ahead. As the officers reached Emily's room and escorted her to safety, Daniel whispered to himself, "You can run, Em, but you can't escape what's already in motion." In his pocket was another phone, encrypted, anonymous, and on its screen, a message blinked. Orion file transfer. Initiated. The horrifying secret wasn't just about his past. It was still happening. And now, Emily and Laura were part of it. Rain poured over the city the next morning, streaking the police station windows with silver lines. Detective Laura Greene stood by her desk, eyes fixed on the monitor as data scrolled rapidly across the screen. Her team had finally decrypted one of the fragments recovered from the USB Emily had given her. The evidence was staggering. Secret payments from government agencies, transfers through shell companies, and encrypted emails that hinted at blackmail. It wasn't just corporate fraud. It was espionage. Laura's gut twisted. "He's been selling classified data for years," she muttered, her voice low. "And using his marriage as a cover." One of the officers looked up. "You mean his wife didn't know?" Laura shook her head. "No. She was his shield, his alibi. Every time someone got close, he made her the proof of his innocence. A perfect family. Perfect life. No one suspects the man who brings flowers to his wife every Friday." Meanwhile, Emily sat in a secure safe house provided by the police. A small apartment with blank walls, no windows facing the street, and guards outside her door. She watched the rain fall through the narrow gap in the curtains, her mind replaying every moment of her marriage. Every word Daniel had ever said now felt poisoned with hidden meaning. "You're safe with me," he used to whisper. How cruelly true that had been, because safe to him meant controlled. Laura visited her later that afternoon, bringing a small recording device. "We're going to take your statement again," she said gently. "Every detail you can remember, every phone call, every trip, every person he mentioned. It could help us connect the dots." Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "He never let me ask questions. Whenever I did, he'd smile and say I didn't need to know. That he was protecting us." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "But he wasn't protecting me. He was protecting himself." As they spoke, one of the guards knocked and entered. "Detective," he said quietly, "someone just tried to access the building network remotely. It looks like a data trace attempt." Laura's heart skipped. "He's trying to find her," she said. "Shut everything down. No Wi-Fi, no external lines." Within minutes, the safe house went dark. No phones, no internet, no signal. Emily sat in silence, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "He's still watching, isn't he?" she whispered. Laura met her eyes. "Not anymore," she said firmly, though she wasn't sure she believed it. That night, the storm intensified. Thunder rolled in the distance as lightning illuminated the room in brief, cold flashes. Laura stayed on the couch, reviewing files by flashlight. Emily tried to sleep in the bedroom, but every sound made her flinch. The creak of the floorboards. The whisper of rain against glass. The ticking of the clock. Each one felt like a countdown. At 3:17 a.m., a soft click echoed through the apartment, the sound of a door unlocking. Laura's head snapped up. She reached for her flashlight, scanning the hallway. "Emily?" she called out. No answer. Another click, louder this time, like metal scraping metal. She moved toward the bedroom, her pulse racing. The door was ajar. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, wide-eyed, holding her phone, which was supposed to have been confiscated. "It rang," Emily whispered. "I swear I didn't." Laura froze. On the phone screen was a single message. "Look behind you." For a split second, everything was silent. Then the window shattered. Wind and glass exploded into the room. Laura ducked instinctively, pulling Emily to the floor. "Stay down," she shouted. The guards burst in moments later, guns drawn, scanning the perimeter. No one was there. Only the storm howling outside and a set of wet footprints leading away from the window. By morning, The police had searched every street within a mile. There was no trace of Daniel. It was as if he'd vanished into the rain. But Laura knew better. He wasn't gone. He was playing a game, and he was winning. Back at headquarters, Laura studied the Orion files again. Among the encrypted documents was one labeled simply, Falcon. She decrypted it, and froze. The file contained a list of names, dates, and coded references to security breaches. One name stood out like a scar across the page. Laura Greene. Her blood ran cold. Daniel hadn't just been watching Emily. He had been tracking the investigation. Every step of it. When Laura returned to the safe house later that day, Emily noticed the change in her expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. Laura hesitated before answering. "He's always one step ahead," she said quietly. "He knows everything we do. He's inside our system." Emily stared at her, the color draining from her face. "Then nowhere is safe." Laura nodded slowly. "Unless we stop playing his game." 3 days later, dawn broke over the city in a pale wash of silver. Detective Laura Greene hadn't left headquarters for more than a few hours of restless sleep. The investigation had become a race against time. Daniel's trail of shell companies was collapsing as federal agencies closed in, yet he was still free, somewhere in the maze of the city. For every lead they uncovered, another dead end appeared. It felt like chasing smoke. But Laura had one advantage now. Daniel's arrogance. He liked control, liked to be the unseen hand. So she decided to turn that desire into a trap. She leaked a false report through a secure but traceable channel. A message claiming the missing Orion master file, the one capable of exposing every corrupt transaction, was being transported to a federal lab that afternoon. If Daniel was still watching their systems, he would see it. And he would come. In the safe house, Emily sat at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. Her eyes were hollow from sleepless nights, yet there was a new steel in her voice when she spoke. "I'm tired of being scared," she told Laura. "I want this to end." Laura nodded. "It will," she said. "We just have to let him believe he's still winning." By evening, the decoy transport, a black SUV with tinted windows, rolled through the industrial district under police surveillance. Inside was not a government agent but Laura herself, wearing a wire and holding a duplicate flash drive that contained nothing but scrambled data. Emily, hidden in a surveillance van nearby, listened through headphones, her heartbeat matching the soft static of the feed. The trap was silent and invisible. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then, from the darkness between warehouses, headlights flickered once, a signal. Laura's driver slowed. Her radio crackled. Target approaching. Rain began to fall again, pattering on the roof like distant footsteps. A figure emerged from the alley, calm and deliberate. Even through the blur of rain, Laura recognized him instantly. Daniel. Same tailored coat, same collected smile. Only now, the mask of charm looked thinner, the edges cracking under the weight of exposure. He opened the SUV door as if he owned it and sat beside her. "Detective Greene," he said softly, "you've been busy." Laura kept her voice steady. "End of the road, Daniel." He laughed under his breath. "Oh, you think this ends with you. But the truth is bigger than either of us. Those files, they don't belong to me anymore." "Then why chase them?" she asked. His eyes met hers, cold, sharp, but tired. "Because she doesn't understand what she's done," he said. "Emily was never supposed to be part of this." At that moment, Laura gave the signal. Floodlights ignited across the street, and officers surrounded the vehicle. Daniel's calm facade faltered for the first time. He turned toward the light, eyes narrowing. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to pause. Rain suspended in the glow, engines idling, breath held. Then he looked back at Laura and whispered, "You think you caught me, but you just lit the fuse." He pressed something on his wristwatch, a small transmitter. Laura's radio erupted with voices. "We've got movement at the downtown exchange. Data upload detected." Daniel smirked. "The truth's already out there, detective." Laura met his gaze. "Good," she said quietly. "Because now everyone will see what you really are." The officers closed in. Daniel didn't resist. He simply leaned back, letting them take him away, that same eerie calm never leaving his face. Hours later, as dawn returned, the world did see. Thousands of files released online, revealing a decade of corruption, fraud, and espionage. Daniel's empire collapsed overnight. His name, his aliases, every false identity unraveled under the weight of exposure. And with it, the cage around Emily finally broke. Weeks passed. The headlines faded, the city moved on, but for Emily, peace came slowly. She stood one morning by the lake near her childhood home, the water still and bright. The air smelled of rain, but for the first time, it wasn't a reminder of fear, it was cleansing. She thought of everything she had lost and everything she had survived. Somewhere behind her, Laura's voice called out, gentle and steady. "You did it, Emily. It's over." Emily turned, a faint smile touching her lips. "No," she said softly. "It's finally beginning." She dropped the old wedding ring she'd kept in her pocket into the water, watching it sink beneath the surface. A symbol of the life she'd escaped and the courage that had carried her through. Far away, in a high-security cell, Daniel sat alone, staring at the blank wall. No smile now. Just silence. The game was over. But the world he had built on secrets had exposed something larger. The power of truth, and of those brave enough to face it. Outside, the rain stopped, and the sun broke through.